Welcome to It's Your Move, a show that may challenge the way you view persons with disabilities. This show is a production of Westchester Independent Living Center, or WILC. We are a disability rights and advocacy organization located right here in White Plains at 10 County Center Road. My guest tonight is Rebecka Palmer. Rebecka is the peer integration coordinator at WILC, where she facilitates trainings and workshops to help raise disability awareness in our community. She will tell us how language can alter and shape public perceptions regarding persons with disabilities, and how these perceptions can contribute to stigma and discrimination in employment. Rebecka has also worked as a domestic violence counselor with women with disabilities, and she will talk about language and accessibility and how that can compromise the ability of these women to seek the services they need. Welcome, Rebecka.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Great. So I also want to mention Rebecka's my coworker.
Yes.
My esteemed coworker, okay. So Rebecka, tell us about your work as peer integration coordinator and about some of the trainings and presentations that are part of your program.
Sure. So I'm part of a pilot program called the Peer Integration Demonstration Pilot Program. It's a long name.
These,
yes.
Just use the acronym.
We call it PIP.
Right, PIP.
And it's actually a pilot program. We have 3 years, and it's funded through the state.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a collaboration with ACCES-VR and Westchester Independent Living Center. And the goal, the contract is twofold. So one is that we have 2 peers, one at ACCES-VR in White Plains and one at ACCES-VR in Spring Valley.
And these are peers now, these are folks with disabilities,
They
and
are,
they serve as
yes.
peers to help others navigate certain services?
Yes,
Okay.
so they have a disability,
Right.
and the philosophy or the goal of this grant is for people that have disabilities can see that there's a positive outcome.
Right.
In terms of employment. So that leads me to ACCES-VR and the overall goal of the grant, which is to assist people with disabilities trying to re-engage or start the road to employment.
Right.
And
Challenging, I imagine.
yes,
Right.
yes. So the peer's role is really to provide the support, the peer support, and guide and give tools on how to themselves moving forward, possibly removing barriers. And some of them can be childcare, can be transportation,
Right.
and housing and other things. And what the peer does is help them remove them, so when they're working with ACCES and gaining employment or education,
Right.
that the barriers are removed so they can basically, there shouldn't be a roadblock for them
Sure.
to go to employment. So that's one fold of the grant. We have it here through WILC, and there's another program in Rochester. So this is the pilot.
Great.
The other part of that program is to provide trainings. So we provide professional trainings and consumer-based trainings to the community for the consumers and also for professionals working with people with disabilities.
You've done quite a few so far.
Yes, we've done, it's been an interesting start. We basically started from scratch.
Okay.
We had nothing, and pulling from the community resources, and we're starting to develop these really great community relationship and having pretty good attendance at our training. So we're looking forward to that. And
Fantastic.
to continue that, yeah.
And you told me right before the show that what brought you into this work was the unmet need and the need for collaborations, which is what you have an opportunity to do, collaborating with various organizations to address the unmet need of employment or the high unemployment rate regarding folks with disabilities.
Yes.
Which I think is 54% nationwide.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I've learned through my professional career is the importance of networking and
The importance of not working.
Networking.
Networking,
Yes.
okay.
So we are only as good as our network.
Right.
And in order to reach out to other populations or fields, we need to really communicate and have a conversation and see where we can meet halfway. Because a lot of times we're all doing the same work.
Right.
We're just targeting a different
Absolutely.
population.
Absolutely.
So that's what drew me to this grant, that I'm going to be able to continue to provide trainings for the community, and also hopefully kind of remove barriers professionally and developing relationships in that aspect. So some trainings that I've done are systemic oppression, having a basic knowledge and understanding of the government and the systems, and how sometimes we can all be well-meaning, but we are really continuing the cycle of keeping somebody not from succeeding or from keeping them from moving forward to their goals.
And give us an example of that, by the way. That's interesting. The unintended discrimination, I guess you could say. Correct?
I mean, benefits, I think, is a huge thing. There's the big concern of a consumer losing their benefits, but they want to work full-time and they want to be self-sufficient. And then there's this fear, well, should we do that or should we not do that? And should we, you know, whereas the individual might be saying, but I want to, and it's my right to do so, so I want to take that step and do that. So that's sometimes what I've seen and come across a little bit more, that you know, individuals want to be self-sufficient. We don't want to rely on government or on other people, and we should encourage that as much as possible. So
I mean, when I mentioned discrimination, unintended exclusion, I guess, and we talked at the opening of the show about words shaping public perceptions and some of the unintended consequences of that in excluding folks with disabilities. And a few examples could be that you've seen in your work.
Well, you know, we've talked, and not only here, but prior, as I'm a huge believer in language and communication. And I think sometimes we are very well-meaning, but we are not realizing that we're actually excluding by including. So we can include, for example, people by color is allowed to apply for a position, or an LGBTQ community, but if you're leaving out people with disability in your job description, you're actually excluding. Because why would I apply? It might not pertain to me, or the company is not open to working with people with disabilities. So that is one way language can exclude. I think even in talking or having conversations or in brochures, you know, one of the things, as you know, I'm Swedish, and sometimes language or big words can be hard for me. Like, I'm like, I don't know what that means. And but plain language, just by using plain language, we can open up room for so many in our community to understand, or just basically have basic knowledge of what we are providing or what's in the community. So yes, it's nice to sound fancy and have all these college words, and you know, but who are we reaching, and who is our target audience, and are we really meeting their need? And I mean, I took a plain language course, and it was really difficult to really write in if you follow the model of plain language. And
interesting.
And just as our consent forms, or you know, how do you write that as plainly as possible?
Sure, without people feeling intimidated or daunted by the whole process of having to fill these things out and understanding what's going on. And then there's also language like handicapped, and using words like crazy, and and I think there's a misconception about folks with disabilities being dependent and pitied. So there's all of those labels and misconceptions as well that contribute to this exclusion, right?
Yeah, I have to say, when I started this work and working more, collaborate more with in the disability community, because I came from the domestic violence world, and when we do stigma, and we talk about stereotypes and those aspects, so I'm really pleased to know that we're moving away as a society from those words.
Becoming much more sensitive.
Yes,
to those words.
that we are more like the harsh words that we used historically. We're not using them as much. We're more aware of what the connotation or what the meaning behind it is.
Well, I think the word retarded comes to mind quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the first ones that people come up with.
Absolutely,
and it's one that it's so easy just to, you say it and you don't understand the impact of the actual word. You're just thinking, oh, it's just a word, and that's all I'm using. But it shapes our way of thinking.
Absolutely does.
It shapes our way of believing.
Absolutely.
And it impacts our community as a whole.
It really does. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to switch gears because I really want to get to some of your work about as a domestic violence counselor for women with disabilities. And you mentioned that domestic violence against women with disabilities is disproportionately underreported, and there's a number of reasons for that. If you could just talk about that a bit.
Well, I think in overall, domestic violence is underreported. We unfortunately, it takes about 8 to 15 times, I think the statistics are, for somebody to actually leave. You know, so you can try to leave, but you tend to go back, And that's much higher for a person with disability.
And I just want to interject here also because I think, and oftentimes not oftentimes, but enough times, significant amount of times, significant prevalence of caregiver abuse, or women who are dependent on their caregivers, who are also their abusers.
Yeah, so that's a huge barrier, right? As a person with disability that has, for example, caregivers or physical limitations in general and trying to go to a shelter, we don't have that many accessible shelters in U.S. alone, but especially also in Westchester. We're moving forward and we're becoming more accessible, but we're not near where we should be.
Are there any in Westchester alone for folks to go to?
There are. My sister's place has accessible beds. The trick there is that, yes, they have the accessible beds. However, it doesn't mean that they're holding those beds for a person with disability to come in. So if somebody else is coming in and they have a need, they're going to give them that space. So, and rightfully so, they should. But, you know, that's another barrier that it's faced in the community. But if you want to talk about somebody who has a caregiver, for example, there's challenges there that shelters or in the non-disability community are aware of, haven't thought of, and so can the person bring the caregiver?
Right.
Can they not? You know, probably not.
Sure.
Because the abuser will know the caregiver.
So that's something. What resources do women have in that regard?
Well, there is great organizations out there that have plans and the shelters or specifically, we're talking about domestic violence now, that they can follow and implement in their own organizations. It is through the Vera Institute of Justice. That was part of another program that I was part of, and the intent is to really connect to different disabilities not disabilities. What do you say? Professions to come together, and it's to change your policies on how would you handle somebody coming in with a caregiver. Do we have a contract with somebody else that can come in temporarily with a caregiver that is separate from the abuser having access to? Because the abuser could follow the caregiver, right?
Absolutely.
Because they know them and they know what agency to work for. They know. So it's so many things I think that we don't think of until it happens. Right. But we can do better by talking about it now. So when it happens, we're ready for it.
Communication. I mean, you mentioned before. I think I cut you off, but we were talking about the disproportionate underreporting for women with disabilities, and you said it's hard for everyone. But why would you think it's a little bit more difficult for women with disabilities to report domestic violence?
I think the additional barriers are that isolation is probably a lot more prevalent. Right. Maybe not understanding, depending on cognitively what their level is or their education is, or if they've been taught. I mean, one of the things, for example, again, that came up was if you don't have the language, right? How do you know you're being abused or not?
That's true.
And how do you have sex ed? When do they get sex ed?
So so it's confusing. That's interesting. So you might not even realize that this is abuse.
Yes. Wow. So I think isolation, funding, if the person is in complete control of finances, right. The fear of institutionalization, I think, is huge.
That is big.
I can deal with it because at least I'm home. Right. Or fear of retaliation. If you're going to do this, who's going to believe you? Right. Right. You're crazy, right? Yeah, exactly. Just the language and the words and doing that. So I think there's so many different barriers that can't, they don't fit cookie cutter. Right. That, but they're so very much real.
Sure. And we have like about a minute. What would you say is the largest misconception folks have, or the general public has, about women who experience domestic violence? I mean, I've heard, and we just talked about this on the way, and that it could be low self-esteem, but it could happen to anyone.
It really could happen to anyone in any profession. Okay. Any standing in the community. It's kind of correlated with disability. It can happen to anyone.
Sure. So Rebecka,
at any point.
Right. If someone wants to get in touch with you regarding the peer integration program, how can they reach you?
They can call me at WILC. I should know the number by now, right? 914-682-3926.
And your extension?
2105.
Great. Well, Rebecka, thank you so much. It wasn't so painless, right? It was
Thank
kind of painless.
you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. We welcome your comments, and we'll see you next time.